rotting in your neck of the woods, Oklahoma, that wouldn't have been there, that the availability of that labor did not exist.
That's exactly what happened. We had an overbuilding of homes. What happened, not just here in Arizona, but nationally, you had a lot of what we call investor, or I call them amateur real estate moguls, who, they would see somebody who, maybe their neighbor sold their house for 25,000 more, and then somebody else bought it and sold it again and made another 25,000 in 3 to 6 months and said, hey, I can do this. And so they were buying and selling, and you'd end up with just average people all of a sudden had 4 or 5 homes because they were able to get these real cheap loans with teaser rates, paying interest only, no down. And so what was happening was they would have this inventory, and so you had a lot of homes that were being bought sight unseen. You have investors not just from Arizona, but all over the United States. They would buy homes and knowing, just planning to turn them over because you can make really good money. So if you're in the construction industry, well, this is a great time. You could make lots of money buying homes to people who never, they were willing to just buy them without seeing them. Now that's changing. And we're going back to the old market where people are only buying homes that plan on living in them. And so they want to make sure that you don't have a gigantic neon sign shining into the backyard. And so, it's actually happened where homes were selling much inflated and then they start coming down to reality. This shows the Arizona sales of existing homes. And compare this to the national slide, and you'll notice that it's much steeper in its growth, and we have not found a bottom yet. So it's worse here in Arizona than it is nationally.
Do you think that, going back to your question, for what we're talking about, have we seen the bottom? Have we seen it?
We have not here in Arizona. This is national single-family homes sold. And you can see we have not had a bottom here nationally either. Let's go to the next one here. Housing permits here in Arizona. This is a very interesting number. You can see the bubble as it comes up, and the blue line is the 12-month moving average. There's a lot of volatility in housing permits. But you can see pretty clearly where the bubble burst and then dropped down. And why do you have this? Why did we bounce back up again and then down again? Well, you got to understand what was going on during the housing bubble. When the boom was going on, it was hard to get the raw materials to the job site. You would literally have a crew there to lay the foundation, and the cement guy would get a better deal, better offer that morning and not show up. And you're paying the cost of the crew, and there's no raw materials. So what they were having to do was actually sign contracts to guarantee delivery of raw materials. Well, when the bubble burst, it burst pretty quick, and they stopped building. But eventually, they had to take delivery of these raw materials they'd already paid for. So what they did is they built specs. This was spec home construction, and we had a large amount of spec home construction. In fact, in some areas, you almost have entire subdivisions that were built that were specs. I mean, you've got a brand new ghost town. I mean, literally brand new in some cases, because it was the only thing they could do. And this is hurting the situation because unfortunately what we've got in housing is a supply and demand imbalance. We've got too much supply, not enough demand. And every time a new home comes on the market, whether it's through foreclosure, whether it's through a spec being built or a new build, that's adding to the supply, and demand has been dropping. Now, first of all, you're getting back to the investors are out of the market now because this isn't a place to make money, so that dropped demand. Now the banks are having difficulty, so they're tightening up loan standards and making it more difficult to get a loan. Well, that's people who want to buy a home but can't qualify, so that's dropping demand. So that spread is widening. Yes.
I asked that question, and you just part of it. Why do they build when you get rid of the excess in homes?
Because they can only stay employed themselves by building homes. And so there's a
What you just gave with the contract, but the other one was that it takes so long to get through the process of permitting and stuff.
that's another factor as well. The regulatory process associated with construction is there. Plus, this is also a big impact. In some communities, in this problem when it comes to housing is a very zip code centric problem. Some zip codes are going to be hit harder than others. And generally, you can tell how much did your property value go up is how much it's going to come down on the backside. It's going to give you an indication of how large the magnitude. The areas that were already built up and that were pretty established didn't see that big of a rise. As the growth moved outwards, whether it was the West Valley or the East Valley or North Tucson or just wherever you would see the growth, those are the areas that were hitting the worst. I believe it was the town of Maricopa went from 20 building permits a month to 2,000 building permits a month during the boom. I can't imagine what the planning and zoning department must look like in having to staff that type of a change. They're back down to 220 to 200 building permits now. They're getting back down to that other normal amount. And so that's going to be the big concern for those towns that were growing like crazy, is how much infrastructure had they invested in, and will they be able to support the bond payments? Because in some cases they issued bonds knowing that these developments were going to be built. So they built the infrastructure for them. All of a sudden they're slowing down. They're not filling out as quickly. So the property tax rolls aren't getting on at the same rate that they originally had planned for. And so that's the concern that may be troubling certain local communities going forward, is how well they manage that growth. Although it seems like most of the areas, they had so much coming in, they couldn't spend it fast enough, so they're sitting on pretty good reserves. It's the ones that spent all the money that came in that are going to be hurting the most. Let me show you this side, and this is the one that really gets to your question. And this is probably the scariest slide of them all. This is conventional mortgages. These are normal mortgages, not subprime, just the normal conventional mortgages going back to the 1979. And you can see we were, the 30-year trend line is here. We were slightly overvalued, and then you had the real estate recession that started in '87. We've been through this before. This is nothing new to Arizona. In fact, every 20 years or so, we seem to have one of these little real estate cycles. And just going back in our history, it's always happened. And if you remember, back in the early 80s, you had really easy lending. You had no down, it was very easy to get loans. And eventually this was primarily driven by the commercial side. 87 bubble was mostly a commercial bubble, but affected residential. And we pretty much went flat on value growth. And then we started back up. We were on the trend line. We pretty much were growing the way the trend line would indicate, but we were not where the value, we'd never really regained the value that had been lost from that 87 slowdown. So after the 2001, 2002 recession, economy's starting to come back. Investors are looking for places to go and places to put their money. And Arizona, Nevada, California, and Florida were 4 states that were identified as undervalued and good investment properties. And so you started to see a lot of money coming in. And of course, when people see some people making money, they come in and copy them, and it's kind of like everybody starts following the Pied Piper, so to speak, because if somebody's making money, I want to do it too. And look at the value growth. Look at what happened. I mean, this is just insane property value growth. It's not sustainable, and that's exactly what happened when the bubble burst. Now property value is starting to come down. So as you can see from this, we've got a lot of, if you're looking here, the average mortgage here at 225 is where the trend line should be, a little over 225. We've got a lot of value deflation that's going to occur in this market, or has to occur to get us back to where we should be. The big question is will we overcorrect, which is what we usually do when the pendulum swings. We go too far up and then we go too far down, and we'll actually draw below. So we've got a long ways to go here in the Arizona market before we're through the housing problem.
When you say a long ways to go, you got any best guess today? Or we talk about
I have a slide on that.
Okay.
I got that in a second. Consumer confidence. This is important to watch, especially for governments, because consumers generate most of our retail sales tax.